Don't Shoes. Recorded live.
Hello, everybody. This is the June 7th, 2013 edition of Genesis Science Fiction Radio, a service of the BlackScienceFictionSociety.com website, and we've got a twofer today, quite a powerful twofer. We have Stephen Barnes and his lovely, I don't know, do you consider her a bride still, Stephen?
Well, I wasn't aware that the term bride had an expiration point on it.
Excellent. I like that. And we have Tananarive, both very talented people in their own rights, multiple threats. I personally have read some things by Stephen, some of the collaborations and some things like that. Not so much for Tananarive, but there's only so many hours in a day. Let me ask, first of all, where are you guys calling in from?
We live right outside of Atlanta, Georgia. We've been here for a couple of years. I'm the Cosby Chair in the Humanities at Spelman.
How long have you been there?
I was Cosby Chair this past term, and now, so that makes 2 years I've been teaching at Spelman.
Okay, and let's start with you. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Miami. So I grew up in a very diverse area of the country, a lot of Cuban influence and Caribbean, rollerblading on South Beach. But I was raised by two civil rights activists in the suburbs.
Mm-hmm.
I was bused in with the white kids to go to the black school, which really didn't do much for my street cred when I was bused.
And now, was that for elementary or high school? How old was that?
That started in 5th grade. It was, sort of these segregation plans to try to overcome segregated neighborhoods. So I happened to live in a mostly white neighborhood at that time, and so I got bused with the white kids to the inner city school. Now, that school turned out to be great. It turned out to be a great experience for me, but I did learn the meaning of the term Oreo, or at least I didn't know an Oreo was a cookie until years later. I thought it was just my nickname.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But, well, other than that, I mean, but you mentioned that it was a positive experience.
Not the other kids so much first.
Yeah.
It was the teachers. I had some of my first black teachers there who took a real interest in me. That was when my writing really began to blossom, believe it or not. I was allowed to stand up in front of class and read short stories, sometimes over the announcements of the school. I was in the band playing trumpet like my mom. So even though it was a very difficult situation socially, I kind of felt outcast from both groups, white kids and the black kids. But in terms of the artistic and cultural environment, it was very good for me.
Uh-huh. And then when you got to high school, did things change any, or were you kind of still in that I don't want to say marginalized, but in that kind of desegregated environment?
By the time I got to high school, the neighborhood had changed a great deal. It was more tri-ethnic, so black, Hispanic, white. I don't really remember that kind of sort of feeling of so much of being a racial outcast. I was more of an outcast because I wasn't allowed to go to concerts, or I was a geek, those kinds of reasons. No one would ask me out. That I felt more of that kind of an outcast than anything having to do with race specifically. Yeah. So that wasn't so much the issue in high school, and frankly, they liked me a lot better than I thought they did, because I apparently was voted female most likely to succeed at the prom.
Mm-hmm.
My prom day wanted to leave early, so I didn't find out about it until later.
Okay, so you mentioned, I mean, even early in elementary school you were a writer. I mean, what kind of stories? I mean, were they fantasy? Were they wish fulfillment? What kinds of things did you start writing at that early an age?
What did you break into my file cabinet? It was that. It was fantasy. It was wish fulfillment. I used it socially, and I think Steve that's true, where I would write stories about my friends meeting their favorite stars. I'm going to really date myself here.
Sure.
Leif Garrett was a big one. So my friend got to spend the day with Leif Garrett. I was always the ran off Mantooth on Emergency. If you're my age exactly, you know what I mean. If you're younger, you missed it. If you're older, you missed it. But Emergency was huge. So I did that, but also there was some science fiction. There was some, and fantasy. There was the kid with the talking cat. I did my version of a series about a kid who had a talking cat, and I remember writing about kids sort of stowing away on a spacecraft, that kind of stuff. So I always was drawn to fantasy and science fiction.
Well, okay, so, I mean, at that young age, what were your influences? I mean, were you an avid reader? Did you see movies? I mean, what kind of brought you into that genre?
Well, it's funny because a lot of my, what I call homeschooling, I wasn't homeschooled, but my mother in particular wanted to make sure that we would learn, as she put it, who we were.
Sure.
So a lot of what I read was history comic books. I mean, she dressed it up as fun, but it was still history. Mm-hmm. It was, about the Amistad Rebellion or about Harriet Tubman. So I grew up with a lot of that from my reading. I don't remember reading a lot of science fiction and fantasy. I mean, aside from what all kids read, I mean, the ones that really jump out to me are Judy Blume, mm-hmm. which was pretty, that was realism. Encyclopedia Brown, of course.
Of course.
Nancy Drew, I will say grudgingly, but I did like the mystery aspect of it. But no, I was not reading. I think the one influence, though, I would say my mother was a huge horror fan. And although I wasn't writing horror per se as a very young writer, I'm sure that had some impact on warping my mind.
Sure. Well, I mean, all kids have an imagination. And, I would think that non-mainstream ideas, fantasy ideas, things like that are born of an imagination. I mean, you talk about a talking cat. I mean, that seems perfectly reasonable for a child or even a talking dog. And moving it into the realm of science fiction is not such a stretch because I think at that age you don't know what the genre is. You're just doing whatever your fertile imagination happens to pull up.
Yeah, I think so. And that was, to me, wish fulfillment. I had a cat. I probably wish we could communicate more deeply.
Mm-hmm.
Carrying out those adventures that I didn't have the means or the guts, like I wrote about a girl trying to get in the Book of World Records. She's, jumping off the roof with a garbage bag. And I think all kids secretly fantasize about doing that, but I figured it wasn't a good idea. So I just write about it.
Well, that was good because we were stupid enough to take umbrellas and try to jump off the garage. But I've never ascribed to having more sense than a houseplant. So, I mean, at least none of us got killed and nobody got hurt.
Nope.
So, now, when you got to high school, did you continue your writing? Did you formalize it any? Did you even take writing classes?
I knew I wanted to be a writer from a young age. So when I went to high school, I quit the band.
Mm-hmm.
I quit my piano lessons. And I just figured I wanted to put all of my resources into learning how to write. Anything related to that was what I did. If it was a summer course at the community college on writing, I went to that. If it was a typing course over summer vacation, I did that.
Okay.
I was really hyper-focused on being a writer all through high school.
And you said you were kind of nerdy. Were you feel that you were maybe not as socially adept as others and probably submerge yourself into the writing as compensation?
Yeah, wow. Yeah, you were spying. As a matter of fact, I had glasses. I still wear glasses, but I wear contacts now. I wish I'd worn them then. Because
yeah.
I had these really thick glasses. I wore pigtails all through high school, so that was not a good look for me, basically. I was a geek. I had no concept of how to wear makeup, or I was completely mystified by the whole dance between boys and girls. So I kind of stood on the sidelines with that one. And I did. I put all of that energy into my writing. I was writing a lot of emergency fan fiction then, but also stories of Black history crept in. A story about the Middle Passage, a girl in the Middle Passage, or, just trying to sort of grasp what that slavery experience was like, too. Because Roots had a big influence on me when it came out.
All right. Well, and so let me ask an obvious question. When did you start coming out of your kind of shy social shell and maybe start relating to people a little bit on a more regular, more substantive level?
Well, for a lot of people, that happened in college, and then that was true for me. I was in a dorm that was I went to Northwestern University.
Mm-hmm.
It was cold, so I spent a lot of time indoors. I was from Miami.
Here in Chicago? You went to Northwestern here, right? Okay.
And that was where I lived in a dorm for communications majors, people who were interested in journalism, radio, TV, film. So basically it was a self-selected social group before I ever walked through the door. And where I started to sort of find myself socially.
Well, that's pretty cool. I mean, college is a good opportunity to, going to college obviously is a good opportunity to find yourself as a person because you're away from your parents' influences, and also you have to make decisions on your own for how you're going to conduct your life. But before we go on with that, how old were you? I mean, you kept writing through high school, correct? And you kept writing through, I'm sure you kept writing through college. When did you think about publishing, or when did you start letting others, have more of a view of what you were writing? And how old were you when you got published first?
Well, I should so know that off the top of my head. And I think it was 1995. Let me see. My first novel was my first publication. I'd submitted short stories. I'd even sold a short story, but the magazine went out of business before it could be published. That was right out of grad school.
Sure.
I had been submitting to contests, even trying to get published from the time I was 10. I can find a handwritten letter, Dear HarperCollins. I have a book about a cat. So I began the submissions process very early, but it did not work for me until I was a grown woman, as they say. I had a job. I was working at the Miami Herald full-time, writing in my spare time, inspired by, a screenwriting contest. I think even then I didn't realize it, but I wanted to be doing movies. But they were willing to accept a manuscript, a novel manuscript, so they gave me a deadline.
Right.
They gave me a reason to tell my friends I couldn't go rollerblading after work. I couldn't go clubbing. I couldn't go to the movie. I had to create the time to get serious about doing the work, and that was when I wrote The Between.
Right.
And actually, I was also inspired by interviewing Anne Rice.
Really?
As a reporter for the Miami Herald, she had a novel called Tale of the Body Thief. Mm-hmm. It was my first exposure to Anne Rice. I had never read Interview with the Vampire. And it was a phone interview where, and a lot of journalists will do that. I hear it now when I talk to journalists sometimes because, I wanted to be a writer. I didn't want to tell her I wanted to be a writer, but I was asking questions that would be relevant to me personally,
Well, sure.
Yeah, and you're crazy not to, frankly. I mean, here's your chance to ask Anne Rice. And one of the things that was bothering me was that I was drawn to speculative fiction, horror writing in particular. But I was nervous about it because of the bias toward genre. At Northwestern, I took some MFA-style workshop classes, and on the first day, you're supposed to go around and say who your favorite writers were.
Right.
And I said Toni Morrison and Stephen King.
Mm-hmm.
And I almost heard audible gasps when I mentioned Stephen King's name. It was like they couldn't believe I would even bring up a commercial writer at these halls kind of thing, like everyone's trying to impress the teacher.
He wasn't artsy enough or...
No. He wasn't back then. I don't know now. He certainly withstood the test of time, but there is a real bias against so-called commercial fiction in a lot of MFA courses, genre, and genre will fall into that. And even award-winning practitioners of genre writing will find themselves discriminated against in academia sometimes, just on that basis. That's the the way it is. It might be changing, but that's just the way it was. So, yeah, when I talked to Anne Rice, I was trying to address that fear that I couldn't write supernatural stories and still be respected. So that was my first question. How do you answer criticism that you're wasting your talents writing about vampires, which was something she was being asked a lot. And she just kind of laughed and said, that used to bother me, but my books are taught in universities. And when you write about supernatural, you can write about things. And she just went on. And my question was answered, and I never did tell her I wanted to be a writer. But that was what got me to work on my first novel that I ended up publishing, The Between.
I wonder if she knows. I mean, have you ever gotten in touch with her and said, see what you started?
Steve had an incident. Steve is here. Yeah, I know I have to pack, so we were going to focus more on me the first hour, but I don't want us to completely ignore Steve. You ran into Anne Rice once.
I was just in a restaurant in New Orleans. She
was
pretending not to be herself. Her bodyguard let me know that she was not in the mood for conversation.
Right.
Okay.
So that's the closest we got. I tried tweeting her once about it. Oh, you inspired me to write my first book. But then I thought, wow, she must hear that a lot too. So I'm not aware that she knows I exist, actually. But I did get the pleasure when I published my second novel of getting a blurb from Stephen King, which, that to me was like, wow, that was the pinnacle in terms of horror writing.
That's huge.
I met him kind of, not by fluke exactly. I was working for the Miami Herald. Dave Barry was working for the Miami Herald. Dave Barry was part of a band called the Rock Bottom Remainders. I love music and always wanted to play in a band. So in chatting with Dave Barry in the cafeteria, he invited me to come on stage, which was very generous, and play keyboard, which I laugh about because I'm not a professional keyboard player, or at least not that I'm aware of.
You're not professional.
No, that's true. And when they said they were going to play Jailhouse Rock, I swear I had no clue. I couldn't even at gunpoint have brought the melody to Jailhouse Rock to mind at that moment. I was so nervous. But I just said I would do it. Yeah, I'll do it. And I rushed right out to get sheet music and figure out what the heck I was doing. But that was how I met Stephen King. And I gave him a copy of my first novel. And when I wrote him in Bangor, Maine, and asked if he would be willing to read my second manuscript for a blurb, he wrote right back and said, sure. He enjoyed the first book, and he'd be happy to blurb the second, which, that was really one of the most exciting moments of my life to this day, just to get that blurb, because his writing had been influential in terms of character development and integrating the supernatural element in the story in some ways that he just does so well. So yeah, that was huge.
What's nice is every now and then you do run into somebody like that who is accessible and someone who can, if short of mentoring, at least give you some support in what you do. And to have gotten him to do the blurb for your second book, that's pretty fantastic. You must have felt great when that happened.
I did, and it's even longer than what ended up on the jacket because it was such a long blurb. But he talks specifically about my characterization in the long form blurb, and that was really moving because frankly, there are a lot of Stephen King readers who don't consider themselves horror readers,
sure.
as a lot of horror writers have discovered, much to their chagrin. They're Stephen King fans. No, they're not going to look for other horror. They just have this guy they like. And I think the reason for that is that his characters are so compelling. He has very compelling situations as well, but who cares about the situation if you don't care about the character? Cujo is a huge novel about a dog barking outside of a car. So you've really got to work those characters to get the reader through that story. And he just does that so well. So that was a big compliment for me.
And, publishers have glommed onto that, how people don't necessarily follow a genre more so than they'll follow a certain author. And that's why when you go to a Barnes & Noble and you look at the books on the shelves, you'll see in most cases for, the top flight authors, let's say the top 500 authors, their names are far larger on the cover of the book than the title of the book.
Yeah.
Do you do that with your books, by the way?
Do I do that? No. See, it's not my decision. I think there was a time in my career that was starting to creep up, like the big gold off name.
Yeah.
But then, it starts to creep back down again. Go through phases.
Well, you mentioned at the beginning that you were interested, you were actually drawn toward film, maybe doing screenplays, maybe doing films. What was the evolution of that? I mean, I guess you started with that desire at the beginning, and give me a little bit of an idea of, or give us a little bit of an idea of how all of that transpired and where you're at today even.
Steve is a huge part of that story, so but I'll start right before Steve.
Okay.
Right before Steve. Well, maybe not right before. When I was in high school.
Whoa. Tell you what, I got a better idea. Instead of doing that, tell us how you two met. How did you two meet?
Oh, my God. Well, we met here in Atlanta.
Okay.
Enough. And Steve, you want to tell that story?
Well, you're going to have to go and do some packing in a little while.
All right.
Get your talk in there.
Okay.
We'll go.
We're very aware of trying to make sure the other gets enough time to talk. But all right. Well, I'll tell you the story of how we met. But it ties in to that earlier story I was going to tell you, and it all ties into screenwriting. Because I remember when I went to a high school program at Northwestern, screenwriter Stuart Kaminsky was there. And I asked him what was the best way to get into screenwriting. I don't know why I asked him that. I guess I just felt like I needed to ask something. And he said, write books. He said, write books. Write a book. They call you. They option it, blah, blah, blah. And that worked fine by me because I was always more interested in writing books. I think I might have thought about screenplays because there's this idea you're going to get rich writing screenplays.
Yeah, not so much, but go ahead.
Largely an idea. Write for love, always. But anyway, that was my first taste of it. So I indeed did do that. I did write the books, and he was absolutely right. They did call, and they did option. But I wanted to learn more about it. And it was about the time I was trying to figure out how do I learn more about Hollywood and screenwriting and television that a friend said, hey, you really ought to hook up with Stephen Barnes. Not in that context, but just because he knew of Steve and he knew me. He knew we were both single, or he thought maybe he wasn't sure about Steve. But he thought, wow, you two would make a great couple. And lo and behold, we were both invited to Clark Atlanta University in 1997 to appear on a panel called The African American Fantastic Imagination, Explorations in Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror. And I was just lucky to be there. Okay, I had published one book, but Steve was, my friend told me, oh, he's written for the Outer Limits on Showtime, and he's done this and he's done that. Octavia Butler was there. Jewel Gomez was there. Who else? Oh, Chip Delaney, of course. Samuel R. Delaney was there. So these were the titans in the black science fiction world. Oh, and me, because I had just published this first novel. And it's like Steve and I were meant to be in a room together. Even before I had arrived, just when I was talking about him with my friend, he said, he worked for the Outer Limits, so I'd never seen an episode of Showtime's Outer Limits. So I turned one on one day, and it was this episode where Amanda Plummer plays a scientist who creates a time machine so she can go back in time and kill serial killers before they can strike. And I was about 10 minutes late watching it, but I was riveted. And I told my friend, oh, wow, if this Stephen Barnes can write for that show, I got to meet this guy. And he said, that was Stephen Barnes' episode. It's called A Stitch in Time. It's awesome. It was like I was being steered toward him. I remember hearing him arrive. The walls were kind of thin, and our rooms were side by side. I heard him arrive and check in with his daughter, and, I basically tackled him as soon as he opened the door the next morning because I could hear his movement as he was going toward the door because I wanted to introduce myself. We had breakfast, but it was just this kind of, like he'll say, I was like a fangirl, right? It wasn't a sensual energy. It was just kind of.
No, it was definitely not a sensual energy. You came across kind of like a puppy.
Yeah.
And I thought you were very cute in just sort of a puppyish way. I had no idea whether or not you had any skills. I knew that you'd been invited, but in a small and insular community, you celebrate people even if they don't have a lot of chops. I mean, that's just the truth.
You have to build them up. Yeah.
So when we went to that first autographing, and I had a chance, it was at a bookstore, and I had a chance to pull a copy of The Between, I think it was, off the shelf. And I took a look at it, and I realized that your writing was extremely advanced, that at creating, mimetic fiction that represents the world as it is right now, you were better than me, and I'd been doing this stuff for a lot longer than you. So all I could think of was, this is real talent here. And I took you very seriously, and my only real thought was, how can I help you? How can I be of any kind of assistance to you? So my thought was really being like a big brother. I had no...
Yeah, a big brother. I love that altruism. I mean, you could probably convince other people of that, but if that's your story, I'll let you stick to it. No, but that's fascinating. You meet somebody with a common interest. It's almost like serendipity on steroids to have had it happen that way. And about how long was it after that did you guys realize that maybe you had a lot more in common and that you may have been working toward where you ended up today?
2 days.
It was 2 days, but I wouldn't call it serendipity.
2 days?
Yeah, it was 2 days.
Is that what you said? Okay.
We got to the airport. By the time we were leaving, we were holding hands like we'd been at summer camp, thinking we could build an empire together. We literally.
So I think you had the wrong idea if you thought that it was chance, because both of us had been doing a lot of very specific emotional work to prepare ourselves to find someone. I mean, there's that expression that, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. I think when the lover is, the beloved will appear. I mean, when you're ready to find a relationship, that relationship appears. And you have a little bit of volition in the way your life flows. So T had done a lot of really interesting work before we met, and I know that I had. So it was, at the time it felt somewhat miraculous, but in retrospect, you can see what caused it.
Mm-hmm. And both you obviously felt the same way at the same time, too.
Well, it was like that college experience, except amplified, because we had so much in common. The first time he saw my apartment, what was it, Day of the Triffids?
Yeah.
I had Day of the Triffids on my shelf. He was like, oh, my God, I'm in love. Now, he didn't say that, but he was thinking, oh, this is it, aside from God. Because I was a geek. I like science fiction. After a certain point, you have felt alone for so long that it's shocking when you find family. I think we felt like we were family even before we knew each other. I mean, and I was in Miami and he was in Washington State, so we had a long-distance courtship for a year and a half. We did not spend a lot of time in each other's company. So when I actually moved out to Washington and we were married, there were some very key things I had no clue about. Does he have lettuce and tomatoes and a hamburger? I don't know. There was a lot I didn't know, but my heart and soul knew that I had found my soulmate.
I think it's a great story. I really do. And apparently, it's got, regardless of all those people who said it would never last, I mean, look where you are today.
Nobody who said that. Most of the people I knew met Tananarive thought she was perfect for them.
Yeah. No, you do sound perfect together. Let me do this real quick. You're listening to the Genesis Science Fiction Radio Show, which is a service of the BlackScienceFictionSociety.com website. This is the June 7th, 2013 edition, and we have the charming couple of Tananarive and Stephen Barnes, both actually gracing us with their presence today. What I'm going to do is, Stephen, I want to talk a little bit about your early time and let her get on with some of the packing, and then maybe if you could stop back in about a half an hour, would that be good?
That'll be great.
All right. So, Stephen, we heard about her starting at 5 years old, kind of converting her imagination into, putting it down on paper. What was the early incarnation of the, the kind of talent that you have now?
Well, I used to tell elaborate lies, and that got me in trouble. When I started stories, people started patting me on the back for it, so it's better to get patted on the back than slapped on the butt. So they started becoming stories. I can remember the very first story I ever wrote was called The Yeti, about an abominable snowman in a Canadian lumber camp, and I wrote that thing when I was in about third grade, I guess. So I'd drawn comic books and stuff earlier than that, but I really do think that T beats me in terms of how early she wrote her first story, at 5. I don't think I did that. But that would be the beginning. In elementary school, and I wrote mostly adventure stories and science fiction stories, stuff like that. That was just the natural way that my ideas came out, and I loved it.
Now, were you, she said they were just stories of imagination. Were you more deliberate in looking at science fiction as what you were going to write, or was it still imagination driven?
Well, I'm not sure what that question is. I mean, I read a lot of science fiction. I read Robert Heinlein, and a series called Space Cat, I think, was the first thing that I read. But I went up to Starship Troopers and have spacesuit will travel and stuff like that fairly quickly. And Isaac Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke, I love that stuff. But I also read, Mike Hammer and James Bond and all sorts of stuff. So I watched, Outer Limits and Twilight Zone and Strange Tales of Science Fiction and Chiller Theater and Thriller Theater and Jeepers Creepers Theater and everything else I could get my hands on. I think that at some point you don't know whether you chose a genre or a genre chooses you. It just was just what I loved. I mean, I loved comedy, but I never tried to write it. I might have tried to deliberately write 2 or 3 comedic pieces in my entire career. I mean, it's just that's just not the way I think. But I do love asking what if.
Right. Let me. One of my influences was there was a kids sets of books about a character, Tom Swift. Did you ever hear of him?
Oh God, yes, Victor Appleton.
Okay. Sure. Yes, absolutely.
Up on my shelf in my office, I have a copy of one of the original Tom Swift books that were written back in like the 1920s, 1930s. Tom Swift and the Nest of Secrets. Yeah, there it is. I see it right there. And my dad owned that. So the Victor Appleton III was updating. It wasn't really written by Victor Appleton. That was a house name. It was Tom Swift and his atomic spaceship, and Tom Swift and the Man from Planet X. I've got a couple of those up on my shelf. I can't see them right now, but there it is. I love that stuff. And I just imagination. It started hitting me at some point, of course, that people who look like me were never represented in these things, but I didn't hold it against them. It started niggling at me eventually.
Sure, and to be very honest, I mean, at the time, obviously non-whites were not well represented in those movies, and the joke is, well, they didn't plan for us to be here come that time.
Well, I think that you're being too kind. It wasn't just that we were not well represented; it's that we were not represented well. When we were represented, it was often in a menial form, a criminal form. There are very few black people in movies in general, and certainly in science fiction and genre films, that were anyone I'd want my son to grow up to be. So there's an essential emotional, conceptual vitamin that was missing. Mm-hmm. You take certain types of imagery in film and books and storytelling, the hero's journey sort of, you can see that in general, cultures give themselves and give their children those images a dozen times a day, 365 days a year, in every multiplex on every television station. They see that, and they're very careful to make sure that their kids get that. It's very interesting to me that we're kind of working backwards from that premise. It's reasonable to think that fiction is important, that imaginative fiction is important. Otherwise, we wouldn't be so addicted to it. We wouldn't want it so much. It would not be so impossible to find a culture that does not offer stories like that. I think that this stuff is important, and I think that it communicates the values from one generation to the next. And the fact that black people in the United States are the only human beings on the planet I know of that have a mythology. Every other group of people on the planet has a mythology that says that God made them first and loves them best, except for black. And that interruption, I think, is on an unconscious sort of Jungian level devastating. So I think I felt that growing up. I needed those images, especially since my dad wasn't in the house and I was raised by my mom and my sister. I had a lot of questions. What is it going to take to be a man? What is it going to take to be an adult? Certainly. But what is it going to take to specifically be a man and get the kind of reactions from men that I wanted and get the kind of reactions from women that I wanted? So what is that? What is that energetic kind of person?
Yeah.
Is that? Do I have to be attracted to be attractive by the kind of women I'm attracted to and respected by the kind of men I respect? So in books, they had these heroes who could do all these things. And, whether it was Conan the Barbarian or Tarzan or Mike Hammer or James Bond or whatever, that was where they talked about men, male men, real men. And invariably in these books, people who looked like me were not represented well. In Conan the Barbarian, Robert E. Howard would write a line like, Conan coming into a town and being repulsed by the stench of Negroes. I mean, you're in Tarzan, Edgar Rice Burroughs had one line about white men have imagination, black men have little, animals have none. I mean, you can't be any clearer than that, what you think about people like me. And I remember I came up with a line once, and this isn't original. I've used this several times, but I needed those images so much that, as I put it, I sacrificed my melanin on the altar of my testosterone. And I needed it, and it hurt. It felt like trying to go to a buffet with people standing on both sides trying to urinate on you. But I got the things that I needed, but it really cost me emotionally. Yeah. So I think that when I started writing, my early science fiction, the stuff that I was publishing, ethnicity was not a very important thing. It got mentioned obliquely a few times, but it really wasn't until I started thinking about writing Blood Brothers that I started thinking that I needed to deal with race per se in my work, and I was reluctant to do it too. I knew that if I did that, I knew that right then I was a science fiction writer who happened to be black. If I started talking about race, I would suddenly become a black science fiction writer, and that was going to hurt my career. I knew it. I could feel it. I could smell it. I could see it. And I was talking to a buddy of mine, a computer engineer named Darnell Gadberry, and I was telling him this feeling that I had. But at the same time, I felt like I wasn't being true to myself in some critical ways, that I was not betraying, but not really being sensitive to the little kid inside me who started this journey. And Darnell looked at me and he said, Steve, eventually someone is going to have to start writing adventure stories, scientific stories about people like us. And if not now, when? If not you, who? And why would you want to write stories for the pleasure of people you wouldn't even want to have in your home? I thought about that and realized that, if I was really going to be true to myself, I was going to be as honest as I could be, then it was my turn in the barrel. That no matter what happened in my career, I had more opportunities than my dad had, who had more than his dad had, and they'd each paid their freight on forcing America to be what it is that America promised to be. It was just my turn to step up and do it. So I did, and the results have been gratifying on some levels and painful on others. Overall, you do what you got to do.
Sure, and what kind of acceptance and what kind of, I don't want to say rejection, but what were the pros and cons that you encountered when you seriously started to write and you wanted to write about people who looked like you?
Well, you have to remember the race is the biggest unhealed wound in the American character. Of
course.
It's tricky. It's like, you go, tribalism is just cheering for your team. Racism is being willing to kneecap the captain of the other team. It's different. It's anger and fear mixed with the natural urge to be with your own. That's just natural. The people want to be with their own, however they define their own to be. It might be Republicans or liberals or Masons or science fiction fans or black people or Californians or New Yorkers or whatever. So if you're visually identifiable, that makes it worse. And making it even worse, of course, is the legacy of slavery. You can't get around that. What slaves basically are is human beings who've had their hard drives wiped as individual autonomous human beings. And what you do is you install Slave 1.0 software. And you do that for several hundred years and lots of generations, and then you, quote-unquote, set people free. Now, under the best of circumstances, no matter how positively everybody's thinking about it, there are going to be some real problems with this scenario because white people know that if we had done to them what they did to us, they would want to kill us. So they've been waiting for us to kill them for 150 years. Now, it's not that kind of party. We're smart enough to know that we're outnumbered 10-1. War is going to end up with nothing but genocide. So what we have to do is find a way to make the system work for us. But the tension, fear, is enormous culturally.
That's pretty obvious at this point. I mean, look at what has raised its ugly head just by us merely electing a half-black president of the United States.
Oh, absolutely. It's the Obama derangement syndrome thing. Just absolutely cracked me up. I'd never followed politics, and I decided that my wife is very political, comes from a very political family. So I decided, okay, my friend Darnell, once again, called me up and told me to turn on television when Obama was giving the address at the Democratic National Convention. What was that, 2008 or something like that? And I turned it on, and he said, look at this guy. Darnell went to college, went to prep school with Obama. And he said, you need to take a look at this guy. This guy could be president of the United States. So
that was 2004. 2004.
Was it 2004? Okay. And I saw Obama giving this speech, and I thought to myself that I had never heard anybody who spoke in what I would call resolved dualities. That, it's like most people think like, heads or tails, and Obama thinks it's a coin. And that is very confusing to people who don't think that way. That kind of, it's very Taoist in that way. And I looked at him, and I'd never heard anybody who was on the national stage who thought as much as I felt that I thought. I think that way, only he's smarter than I am. I could feel it. And I thought, this guy is very interesting. I have no idea if he'd make a good president, but I really like the way this guy thinks. So I decided, okay, I'll start following politics right now. And one of the things that came out very, very quickly is just how much fear there was. I mean, the whole race thing, people were trying very, very hard not to allow it to color, so to speak, their perspective, but they can't help it. You can't help it. I mean, human beings, that's the way human beings are. One of the things I love saying to the bigot is that, when they accuse me of thinking that white people are unusually racist or something like this, I say, no, I think that there's nothing special about white people at all, neither positively nor negatively. And I know that because they do think that there's something special about them, they are offended by what I've just said, but they cannot call me on it, because to call me on it, they'd have to admit that they were bigots. I love doing that. But it was very clear that there was some of that involved, and that if the positions had been reversed, we would have been just as ticked off with a white guy suddenly taking power. It was ugliness that people had to be too polite to let all the way up to the surface. It was bubbling up every place. And I think it's a very good thing, because that's what's been there. There's less of it now than there's ever been in my lifetime, but there's still enough of it. I mean, that anyone who thinks the playing field is level is a bob off a plum. It's that way. It may not ever be able to be completely level. However, what used to be a wall that was 10 feet high is now a wall that's about 5 feet high. So if you're willing to work harder than the other guy, you can get over the wall most of the time. Not all the time, but it's not as bad. I mean, it's still better than it is in the natural world. I mean, I'd rather be a black man in America at any point in our history than a rabbit in the woods. I mean, the fact is that human beings screw each other over, and always have. And some uniquely bad screwing happened here in the United States. But the thing that's kind of remarkable about us is not that we, wiped out the indigenous people, for instance, because everybody does that. It's that we agonize about it. That's what's kind of remarkable about this country. They actually feel guilty about wiping out a group of people. There aren't any Neanderthals left around because the Cro-Magnons didn't give a damn. but we actually care. So I think that I can look at America as both as not living up to its promise, but then I have to ask, but how many of us do? And what is that promise, and how great is the promise? Not the actuality of it, because it's acted upon by human beings, but what's the promise? And I say, this is what my ancestors paid to be a part of. I'm going to do everything in my power to make this country live up to its promises so that my daughter and her children can can benefit from it because of all the opportunities I have. For all the bigotry there may be, I can stay in any hotel in the country. I can go any place. That was simply not true for my grandparents. So if I feel upset because people don't buy as many of my books as they might if I were of their group, that's complaining about a limp when you're talking to someone who has no legs. You have to have some perspective. Human life has never been easy. It has never been easy. I believe that people have the ability to make their dreams. But I also believe that we get programmed by our lives to not trust ourselves, not love ourselves, not go after the things that we want. I can spend as much time as I want to complaining about the disadvantages I have, and I've got them. And probably everybody listening to this knows exactly the kinds of things I'm talking about. Or I can decide to have the best life I can possibly have, to be as happy as I could be, to love my family as much as I possibly can, to this one life I've got. If I allow bigotry to poison my heart, and I feel hate, that line about hatred is like taking poison and expecting the other person to die.
Yes.
I'm going to live my life on my terms. So, yes. Have I had some problems in my career? Yes. Have I also had a terrific career? Yes. Which, door number one, door number two, which would you take? I choose to feel pretty good about life.
And that's something that a lot of people lose sight of. There's two things they lose sight of. The first is, for most part, let's take the people who are just listening online right now and listening to the show. Compared to 99 point and a significant number of nines of the population of this earth, we all have a paradise. I mean, our lives are a paradise compared to them, and the problems we have, of course, there's still problems for us. They still may provide setbacks that kind of slow us down, but it's not like going to bed hungry every single night. It's not like having no prospects for a future, things like that. And the part B of that is that far too often people, I believe, I don't want to talk for everybody else, but I believe that in many instances when we do well for ourselves, oftentimes we look at that as something to protect from other people rather than maybe sharing some information, sharing a portion of the largesse to maybe help other people achieve the same thing. So,
it's an argument.
Go ahead.
So is it how much sharing, how much individualism, and I think that's part of the tug between left and right. Collectivism as opposed to individualism, and there's no right and wrong there. It's percentages, and I think that we need to have deeper social safety net. On the other hand, the higher the net, the lower the ceiling. This is the argument that's going on between these sides. These disagreements are not primarily by bad people, but I do think that a lot of people on the right are scared absolutely to death right now. Just think about the amount of change that there's been since 9/11. I mean, in human beings, any kind of material grows more rigid under pressure, and when we got pumped on 9/11, it was the rough equivalent of somebody walking up to Mike Tyson and slapping them. There wasn't really enough damage to hurt the country, but we got really mad and really irrational. We attacked the wrong friggin' country. You know what I'm talking about? I was really worried about America, just in terms of wow, were we really that easy to tick off? I mean, would we really lose perspective that quick? Yep. And you add to that the strides that women are making, and a black president, and gays, and legalization of marijuana, and America no longer being the dominant world power, and so forth and so on. In the same way that we were and never will be quite again. The world has changed too much, and I think that people who are more conservative and more anchored in the past are feeling threatened. Things are moving too fast, and so they're trying to put on the brakes. And I would guess that the more you know history, the more you will see this pattern repeated throughout history, except that things are moving so fast now that we're seeing more violent swings in that sense. There are people who are terrified. Anytime you see people who seem angry, ask yourself, what are they afraid of? Anger is just a mask over fear. So
and that's true because. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. It's okay. I can babble on, at any point. So I'm sorry.
Well, here's something that people. Yeah, this is something that people should take to heart. When you are thinking in terms of looking at a society, looking at a culture, looking at a business adversary or anything else, you have to remember that that person is going to ascribe to you, possible actions, motivations, and behaviors that they themselves would do. And that's one of the reasons that whites are as fearful about the ascendancy of non-whites as they are, because they have treated non-whites so poorly that they cannot imagine retribution not being down the road.
I think that those who are most afraid are indeed those who would have made the very worst black people. I listen to these people, and sometimes I say, you'd make a terrible black person, boy. You would have been in so much trouble so fast. You have no flexibility. You have no perspective. You think the very worst of people. You project your darkest, ugliest stuff onto what you see out there. You would have been so destroyed so quickly. Personally, my belief is it's all going to work its way out, but a lot of people are getting hurt along the way. I try to help as many people as I can, but the primary thing I can do really is what it is that I'm doing. I try to communicate a perspective of healing and of being able to seek your dreams, but simultaneously helping all the people around you. I don't think that it's a conflict. I really do believe that we're heading in the right direction as a species, as a country. That's from my kind of science fiction, to bring it back around. I tend to be a pretty optimistic person. I don't think I've ever written a novel that had an unhappy ending. I've written a couple of short stories that were a little nasty pieces because things do go up and down. But if you step back and take a look at the cycles, you have a choice. If things go up and down, if it goes up and down and up and down, then you can conceivably start when things are down, things get better for a while, and then they get worse. Or you can start when things are good and they get worse. In other words, that's you. That's your choice of what part of the cycle you look at. I choose to look at things being okay and then they get worse and then they get better. I like it when things get better. But it's a glass half full sort of thing. I'm not saying that my point of view on reality is the truth. I'm saying this is what I'm committed to.
Right.
That I'm prepared to die for a particular position that says life is good. I can't prove it. And I don't try to convince other people of it. But if you agree, I'm happy to show you what it is that I've been doing. I owe so much to my teachers. I couldn't begin to tell you the quality of the teachers I have. I wrote stories. If I write stories of the hero, and the hero's journey is a very specific thing. It's the hero is confronted with a challenge, and initially they reject the challenge, and they're forced to accept it, or allowed to accept it. They set out on the road of trials, during which they meet allies and gain powers. They have their initial confrontation with evil, in which they're defeated. They enter the dark night of the soul, during which they feel that all their abilities are insufficient to meet the task at hand. They take the leap of faith, which is always faith in one of three things: faith in themselves, faith in a higher power, or faith in their companions. If they do all those other things, and they confront evil again, this time they're victorious, and the last step is the student becomes a teacher. So I applied that thing, that Campbell's model of the hero's journey, to the question of what is my life? What is it that I want? What is it that I want to be, and do? And ultimately, there are two questions in the world. There's the question, who am I, and what is true? And there are two questions in writing, or two things to write about. What are human beings, and what is the world that they see? So my writing is a way of asking, who am I? Who are we? What is man that thou art mindful of him? And the other side of that is plot. And all a plot is what a character does in a given situation. So the way the writer thinks about reality, what the writer thinks about people is shown in what they have the people do. What the writer thinks about reality is shown in the way the universe responds to what the person does. In other words, the plot. So I say that we are unfolding and evolving and so forth. It's a perspective. And that's the way my stories are in general. I will put my characters through hell, but I will always bring them out the other side.
Well, and I think that that's one of the reasons why your writing is as popular as it is, because, through whatever convoluted story that you tell, when reaching the end, people do feel, a positive, maybe an uplifting aspect to what you've put them through. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Some people, well, here, this is one of my favorite quotes from Isaac Asimov, and it's one of the reasons why I write. Anyway, let me just do the quote. He said that individual science fiction stories may seem as trivial as ever to the blinder critics and philosophers of today, but the core of science fiction, its essence, has become crucial to our salvation if we are to be saved at all. And in that one saying that he put out there, you know, to write science fiction and to leave, you know, the world at the end without hope seems contra survival, you know, unless you can inspire somebody to go, oh no, that's not the ending I want for my life. That's not the ending I want for people. That's not, you know, where I want to take things. And so I think ultimately the way that you construct your stories, it really follows that and provides something that people obviously like.
No, what I think it is, I think it's just astoundingly egotistical for people to be too pessimistic. In other words, they say the universe has been here for 6 billion years, but it's all about to fall apart during my lifetime. You know, for 2 million years, we got down to the point where there was only less than 1,000 breeding pairs of human beings in the whole world. And we came back from that, and we've been struggling with this for 2 million years. But it's all about to fall apart in my lifetime. No, man, you're watching yourself fall apart. You're going through the natural deterioration people go through, and you're mistaking your reality for what is outside your ego. It's like, you know, don't take yourself so seriously. None of us get out of this alive. Take the long view. You know, things have been getting more complicated consistently and more complex since the Big Bang. That's what the universe does. Life is just a part of that. Consciousness is just a part of that. The people like Asimov were smart enough. He had mastered so many different disciplines that he could see the patterns. There are patterns to things. And he went deep, and he could talk about these things. And whether he ever codified his philosophy or not, there's no way anybody could be as smart as he was and to know as much as he did without seeing past illusion to a degree. It's up, you know. He wrote the psychohistory aspect of his future histories. He's talking about the big patterns of humanity, of history. Once you start seeing that, you can relax a little bit. Yeah, you're going to die, and your family is going to die, and everybody you know is going to die. But you know what? If you don't attach to who it is that you are as an individual, if your commitment has always been to give as much of yourself away, then your individual life or death is less important than this thing that is happening around us, this life thing that we're a part of, that we've been a part of since the beginning of time, and will be going on long after all of us are dust. You enjoy every day that you have, and you work your butt off, but you don't take yourself too seriously.
No, and that's true too. But you know, a lot of people have a hard time getting outside their heads, and also, you know, when you look at what's happened over the last generation, where our country has gone, the kinds of influences that we've had, some of the pushes that, you know, conservative thought have put on us, a lot of people are. I mean, other than a time of really dark war, World War I, World War II, maybe even the Civil War, you know, we see evidence of a lot more people doing that, quote, living a life of quiet desperation, unquote, and it's manifesting itself in, you know, obviously in depression and people going homeless, people doing really extreme things like mass murder in theaters and things like that. So yeah, your cyclical, you know, your discussion about the cyclical nature of man, you know, we go through various ups and downs, and if we always concentrate on the down, I tend to think that it pushes off and makes us slower coming back up the slope because of people's, not only their expectations, but their desire to wallow in negativity, and that's truly unfortunate.
Well, you know, it's also part of the way we're programmed. I mean, you pay if there's 1,000 houses that are doing just fine and one of them is on fire, where do you put your attention? You know,
exactly.
If the forest is full of flowers and there's one tiger out there, you better watch the tiger. You know, so the things that will hurt you in life, actually we're programmed to pay more attention to them than the nice things because they can change our lives so drastically and so permanently. So it's not our fault. I mean, a lot of the things that are plaguing us right now are because we've been so successful. I mean, there's so much obesity because we won the war on food. You know, so we did not evolve to live in a society with a McDonald's on every corner. We did not evolve to live in a society where meat and fat and salt and sugar was so easy to get. You know, we won. You know,
yeah.
What's pollution? Pollution is here. You know, it used to be there were so few people that you could pee in the river and it didn't matter who was downstream because there wasn't anybody downstream. the problem now is that the habits that worked just fine, 2,000 years ago are starting to kill us. So I think that we will adapt to that stuff, but, fear, there is stuff to be afraid of, but there's more stuff to love. That's all. It's like you definitely have to pay attention. You don't go around saying, there are no weeds in my garden. There's no weeds, and there's no weeds, and there's no weeds, because the weeds will eat your garden. But you do make certain to notice how many beautiful flowers there are there while you're pruning out the weeds.
That is true. Hang on a second. You're listening to Genesis Science Fiction Radio, a service of the Black Science Fiction Society.com website. This is the June 7th, 2013 edition, and we are tag teaming with I don't even know how to characterize you as a couple, but multi-talented, multiple threat, Tananarive Du and Stephen Barnes. And what I would like to do...
She's back.
I'm sorry?
Tananarive is back. Just wanted you to know.
I'm back in the house.
All right, so what I'd like to do now is, for about the next half hour, I'd like to take anybody's questions online, and also, I don't know if you guys, are you guys dialed into the chat room so that you can read questions? If not, I can do that. That's no problem.
Oh, no, we can see everything they're saying.
And let's hope that some people ask us about Danger Word, the short movie that we're watching.
Well, I was going to take the last half hour to talk about that and let you guys talk about the whole project, if that's okay. Or if anybody asks about it, go right ahead. So if we could unmute the people who are on hold right now, and everybody behave yourself, everybody be polite. And here, watch this. Whenever I ask, does anybody have any questions, we get a resounding silence, which of course is like a death knell for a radio guy. But does anybody have any questions? Oh, not this time? All right, well, go ahead, you all.
Not only no, but heck no. All right, here we go. Mr. Barnes.
Yes, sir.
Really, really appreciate the writing. And, yeah, I watched the Outer Limits. As a matter of fact, I watched the whole series again since I first heard about Danger Word. Moving on. Danger Word. What are we going to do about this problem?
What problem is that?
When are we going to get more fan activity in this movie?
Well, tell you what, before we go there, since you're going to ask about it, why don't one or the other of you give us a little summary about Danger Word, tell us what it's about, and what you're planning to do with the project.
Okay, before
everybody
go ahead. Let me ask a question that came up in the chat room. So when did I realize I could really write well? I always thought I could write well, and I always thought I sucked. It's the same thing now. I go through cycles. But ultimately, I do the best I can. I put it out there, and people like it. But I see the stuff that still remains to be done. But there's no one. You can't spend as much time as I have doing what I do without getting good at it. I mean, it's nothing special about being good at something. You just spend the time and the focus, and you do your best. And anybody out there could do that. I'm happy with the skills I have, but I just see how much further I have to go. But anyway, in terms of Danger Word, talk about Danger Word a little bit, too.
Danger Word is our first short story collaboration. It was published in 2004, our Dreams anthology of black horror that Brandon Massey edited. And, there's enough for an anthology series right in that one book. It really launched our young adult zombie series, the Devil's Wake series. Devil's Wake we published last year. The sequel, Domino Falls, came out in February. We say young adult. It's written, frankly, for everybody. We just toned down the sexuality and language so it would be age appropriate for 14 and older. And in a lot of ways, Danger Word, the story itself, is a child's eye view of the zombie plague on her birthday, a day that begins well and ends badly. And it's the arc of the original short story. The original short story was basically expanded into sort of a longer length, and we changed the gender. It was a little boy in the original short story. It was a teenage girl in the novel. We scaled her down to about 12, that threshold between childhood and adulthood. So it's in some ways it's a coming-of-age story set against the zombie plague.
But we scaled it down to 12 for the movie, and she was 16.
Yeah, I know. I know she was 16, and we scaled it back. And really, for the vulnerability, visually, it's just scarier when she's smaller.
Yeah. So we basically decided to do a short film for a number of different reasons, both for the film itself and the experience that we'd get, and the fact that it would be fun, the fact that Tananarive had never seen her work translated to the screen. I'd had that pleasure multiple times. I definitely wanted my baby to have that. But also because if we do it right, then we're playing for position. The next step is to do a feature film. So
I agree.
If there is enough interest from people, if people show us, and people have been so wonderful. Anybody who donated to this, who invested in this, thank you from the bottom of our hearts. You not only helped make the project happen, but you showed us that there was interest. That's the interesting thing about crowdfunding. We're actually able to take a customer survey. Do you want this? Is this something that we should put the next couple of years of our lives behind? If we do this, if we take all that energy and all that creativity and everything, and we start creating films that contain this point of view on humanity, are we going to starve? We need to know. I mean, just keeping it real here, because I would like to be able to do that, but we have to take care of our family. You guys have shown us that you care. You guys have shown us that you do want to see this. I'm blown away. I really am.
And, it's all part of a master plan. And I, too, really, I've come to tears many times, when I see the names popping up and then complete strangers who give you money just because they love the genre, they love the idea, pretty much all through Facebook. The Shadow and Axe trade blog, the African Cinema blog, was very supportive from the beginning. They wrote 2 articles about it. The second article came out before we'd even reached halfway goal that we wanted for pre-production. So we were more an idea than real then, and they gave us the boost. We've had a lot of angels in this process, but it's part of a master plan. Someone mentioned My Soul to Keep. In a lot of ways, for me, emotionally, my attachment and my desire to see My Soul to Keep brought to the screen was a lot of what feeds the desire to make Danger Word. Because for me, this is laying out a blueprint on how to gain control of our own creative process. I was blessed to have a long association with Blair Underwood, who got it set up through Nia Hill and D'Angelo Steed at Strange Fruit Media at Fox Searchlight. And it was at Fox Searchlight for a very long time, before my son was born. And he was in 2nd grade by the time I got the rights back, because that was just a long process. And from the beginning, Blair had been afraid of what they call development hell. Development hell in Hollywood years is 7 years. It's, the language in contracts. I remember seeing a phrase I had never seen before, ad infinitum. It's like, what? No, it's just long. You can grow trees waiting for a project to get made in Hollywood. And when you compound that with the experience we had pitching stuff with Blair, with Forrest Whitaker in the room, we pitched A Good House at a production company, gave our pitch, and he says, that's great, I love it, there's this one thing, do the characters have to be black? Right there in your face, and that's just the reality, because a black film to them automatically is a film, or has been, automatically a film that's not going to be profitable.
Well, I think that it's even more than that. I think that just the honest part of it is that executives will talk about the audience, but they're really talking about their own preferences as well. And that's just the average human thing. Once again, it's nothing special about these people. Japanese people make movies about Japanese people. And there's nothing special here. America is a very interesting experiment where we're trying to bond ourselves together on a conceptual thing. We're all Americans, whereas we all know that tribalism goes along visual lines. So we're trying to live up to something that human beings aren't really wired for, and there's a lot of pain in the process. I try not to take it personally. It's impossible not to take it personally. It hurts.
And, I went through the pioneering process. I didn't discuss this in my early life, but we were one of the first black families in our neighborhood. We had rocks thrown at us. Yeah, I was a pioneer everywhere I went my whole life. And I have to admit, I was a little, more than a little, not just frustrated, disgusted by the experiences I had pitching to people I didn't think ultimately would care about the project. There were a lot of people at Fox Searchlight who cared passionately about it. It's just that there aren't any people of color, haven't been in Hollywood, who can greenlight a project.
Look, it's not Hollywood. But one thing I don't want anybody out there to think is that it's Hollywood executive, because it's also New York, for instance. My first solo novel, Street Lethal, this black character described as being almost African in his features. They put a white guy on the cover. My editor, Beth Meacham, was so embarrassed. And I asked her what had happened. She said it came from over her head. Susan Allison, who was the editor-in-chief at ACE at the time, she said it was like the art department. I called the art department. The art department said it was marketing. I talked to marketing. Marketing said that the truck drivers who put the books on the shelves, at truck stops wouldn't have put it up there if they thought it was Shaft Goes to Space. In other words, nobody will take responsibility for this. Nobody will. So if no one takes responsibility, it's like in the military. Somebody steals, gets into the jam in the kitchen, and nobody cops to it. The entire company suffers for it. As far as I'm concerned, this is human stuff. And the people in Hollywood, they have their personal preferences, sure, but they're also looking at the audience. This is what you're dealing with. So what you have to do is understand what the game board actually is. Not feel fear about it, not feel resentment about it, and ask yourself, how do I play the game anyway? Because the name of the game is you want to win. You want to have a happy life. You want to be able to express yourself. There are these unspoken rules that people will lie their butts off about, and most of the time they aren't even aware that this stuff is going on in their own subconscious. You have to think ahead. You have to be able to say, okay, there is this problem. I'm going to run into it. In Hollywood, if I was pitching at a pitch meeting and the subject of race came up, I knew that if I could not get the subject off of race fast, I had just lost that job. So I would have to use kind of like, Aikido techniques and get them, if race looked like it was starting to come up, I'd get them to think about the project. Look at this wonderful project we can do together. Look at this episode we can do. What do I do? If I could keep their attention on what we could do together, keep it off me, I had a chance, and I could do very well. If it was about black and white, I almost always lost. So it's trying to understand, not feeling resentment, keeping, trying to grasp what's going on without taking it personally, and remembering that your intent is to win the game, not make someone admit that they're a bigot or something. The point is to live your life in your terms, support your family, get your dreams out there.
And, it got very emotionally difficult. There were some moments, I had a president of a studio look me in the eye and say, we are going to make this movie. And it's like, that's a pretty big high. And then it didn't happen. And it's been, in fact, it was a very disillusioning process, but at the same time, how lucky I was it got that far. You lose perspective, when you think you're so close. Well, I really did start to feel that chafe of race, despite knowing all the things that Steve just said. It chafed. And coming to Atlanta, fast forward, got a job at Spelman College, have been the Cosby Chair in the Humanities. And just as Atlanta was magical for me in terms of where I met Steve, and I don't think it's an accident. There's a very strong black science fiction and fantasy community here. So, of course, we would have met in Atlanta. Of course, Spelman would be interested in bringing me on as a Cosby Chair. In retrospect, I didn't know that, at the time. It's been an amazing position. Event planning, we had an Octavia Butler celebration in March. That was incredible. On March 21st, there's still a Facebook page if you want to see pictures from it. It's called the Octavia E. Butler Celebration of the Fantastic Arts. It has a Facebook page. Please join. It will be ongoing in conversation. The first guest I brought to Spelman as Cosby Chair was director Ava DuVernay. Now, I hope you are familiar with her. She is an independent film director. She wrote and directed I Will Follow, Middle of Nowhere, through her Affirm distribution company. She actually not only writes, directs, and produces her own films, she distributes them. They play in multiplexes because she has worked out the distribution deals with individual theater owners. So between Ava coming to Spelman, just living and breathing her model, and also preaching to us her model, and also telling us stop caring about getting an Oscar nomination. She stopped caring about that because she worked for years as a publicist helping people get Oscar nominations, so she knows what that's all about. She knows who's doing voting. Big surprise, the kinds of roles that get Oscar nominations when you look at who's voting. So just stop caring about that, sort of cut yourself loose. So I was empowered by that, was working on a treatment for my soul to keep here and there, pecking away at it, telling my students my progress when I was teaching in the fall. But it wasn't until March at the Octavia Butler celebration when I heard Georgia Tech had a Black Science Fiction Short Film Festival. I couldn't go, but I thought, oh, what a great idea. They were very helpful in suggesting films. So we had a Black Science Fiction Film Festival at Spelman. And watching those 15-minute shorts, and again, you can find more information about those films on the Octavia Butler page, but they included Anne Mosley Dupont's Invisible Universe documentary that she's been, in fact, is still raising funds for, that has interviews with Octavia. It had Wake by Bree Newsome. It was a student film project. It is a scary little movie that you can see on YouTube. The Abandoned, which is a web series pilot, Keith Joseph Atkins, who also donated to Danger Word. You know, as soon as I saw his pilot, I was like sharing it, telling people, you've got to support this. And seeing them on the big screen was a real, I'd seen them all on YouTube. That was cool. But the big screen made me realize these are movies. You know, these are 15-minute movies. And wait, I know a director. You know, my friend Lucina Fisher directed a short film just, you know, less than 2 years ago. And we have a short story, Danger Word, that would make a great, you know, so right. We started talking, and it was as if just one conversation made it real.
You know, it was all a matter of everything I've been able to do in my life, and there are only three things in life that I care about. I care about writing and things connected to that. I care about my family, things connected to that, and I care about martial arts and things connected to that. And in every arena, it's always been a matter of find someone who's already done the thing that you want to do, figure out what it is they're doing, do that. And when it came to filmmaking, I asked myself, well, if I kind of wanted to do this, and I was running into problems in Hollywood, and there are problems with the publishing industry right now, and people are reformulating things.
Everything's up in the air.
And these people are making short films, and if I believe that the way to make a $50 million movie is to make a $5 million movie, and the way to make a $5 million movie is to make a $500,000 movie, and the way to do that is to make a $50,000 movie, and the way to do that is to make a $5,000 movie, and then a $500 movie at the very beginning, then suddenly I had a roadmap. All I had to do was understand what it was that these filmmakers were doing and make something. Could I create a family of people who had the similar dream and had the skills I didn't have and the resources I didn't have? Was there enough of a market? If I put my passion and my experience, and I felt that Tananarive and I have different sets of skills that overlap, and if we took the best of both of our skills, that would, as an aggregate, be as powerful as almost anybody who could be working in Hollywood. There are people in Hollywood that are better than me, but they're not that much better than both of us put together. If we could really cooperate with each other and really put our egos down and create something that's really wonderful. And that's what we started doing. We started enrolling other people in it, and that's what we're hoping your listeners are going to feel what it is that we're trying to do here. We're going to show you how to do it. We're going to tell you
we learn how to do
every step of this. We're going to talk about the attitudes. We're going to tell you the techniques, the precursive things that you need to do, so that you can go as far as your talent, your passion, your ability, and your resource circle can take you. And in order to document this, we have to do it ourselves. We're almost through with the crowdfunding aspect of this. We have a few more $1,000s to raise with that before we can do post-production and so forth. But after that, it's going to be going to investors. So the community has been supporting this.
Yeah, I call it community funded. I mean,
yes.
It's crowdfunded, but it feels like it's community funded.
It's you guys.
It's the people who supported our careers, who just love science fiction, who love horror, people who are Black cinephiles who maybe, horror isn't their biggest thing, but they like the idea of what we're doing because we're doing it ourselves. And it's just such a happy moment. All of these different elements have come into play. The improving HD video so that you don't have to use film, which would have made even this prohibitive. We could not have shot Danger Word on 35 millimeter, probably not 16 millimeter. HD video changes the game for filmmakers, period. Then when you add on top of that social media, where you have the ability to reach a large number of people who can spread the word, that made all the difference. We literally raised enough money to hire our actors, and hire them, not say, hey, come make this for free. Hire actors, name actors. Frankie Faison, who's on Banshee on Cinemax. He was in The Wire. He's been in every Hannibal Lecter movie. He's an excellent actor. He believed in the script and the story. He wanted to play this grandfather. He wanted to be with his granddaughter in this kind of movie, something different he'd never done. The little girl, Saoirse Scott, she was on One Life to Live for 4 years. A beautiful little child actress. Where's the work? Where's the work? So part of what it is giving actors an opportunity to grow and shine. Now she's had an experience unlike anything she's done as an actress. She's had to stretch herself. She got coaching on the set from Mr. Faison, who turned into Grandpa Joe to help her. And that was such a blessing to watch, the two actors being with each other. You put the team together. Lucina is an excellent director. She had a team, director of photography. It's so important that every element of the project has to be strong. You have to start with a strong story, whether you write it or you option it from someone or get a free option, whatever it is. You have good people on your team. Some of them will be willing to defer payment, thank God. We have an editor, Terrence Taylor, also a horror writer, Bite Marks. He's a vampire writer, also a film editor. So he's our editor. He loves this. He'll stay up all night if he can and not worry about getting paid till later, which, believe me, he won't. But because he loves it, because he believes in it, and because it gives him a chance to do something that's away from his job. Suddenly, that shoot was almost like being back in college, even better, because there was communal housing, and it was freezing, so we'd all huddle in the room with the fireplace, and the kids were running around, and the director had her kids there, and our son was there, and our stepdaughter, who's a trained actress, who graduated from UC Irvine, has been doing theater for years, got a chance to actually be in Daddy's movie and earn her place there and do a great job. It was a very moving, family-oriented, almost spiritual, really, experience that began with the narrator in tears during the read-through, so that's a good sign, to not knowing that Frankie Faison and Saoirse Scott could both sing when it calls for them to sing Amazing Grace, and then it's time for them to sing, and they have these gorgeous voices. It's like, oh, my gosh. Just all these great moments.
Yeah, we're going to have a trailer for it within a few days. But what we did and what these people did, our technical crew did, and those actors, wonderful actors, and our wonderful director, Lucina Fisher, who only got 4 hours sleep a night. It's like, that has got to end. I think that it's probably the purest version of my thought on story I've ever seen, that I've ever had done. And I think that we did a really good job with it. That's one of the beautiful things about that kind of collaborative medium, is when you have other people who are talented and intelligent and energetic as well, and they bring their A game, then it elevates everything. And I am profoundly grateful for that. I think we've got something that in 15 minutes has more genuine emotion, more horror, and more action than a lot of movies that are 2 hours long. I think it works. I think it really, really works. We're very proud of it, and I think that our next step is to design a 90-minute version of that story. That story is like the first act of a larger story, and hopefully film it next year. And that's what we're doing. And then, yes, My Soul to Keep.
Yeah, well, yeah. To take it full circle, I can go back to LA now and feel like I can go into those pitch meetings without losing my head, losing myself. That when you're on a tightrope of emotions, there's so much riding on the meeting. I'm not going to feel that.
Isn't that what?
Because I'm going to be thinking, you know what? If you don't like this story, that's your loss. I will make this myself.
But don't you understand that that's how Tyler Perry got started? He found an audience first. He went out, he did the footwork, and he created an audience. Then he went to Hollywood. Whatever you think of Tyler Perry, he went to Hollywood and he said, look, this is making money. So everybody wants to be first to be second. So if there's one thing, you don't find an agent so they'll go out and get you work. You get yourself work, and then you find an agent to represent you. My first agent, I brought him the job. I said, negotiate this contract for me, and they're happy to make free money. Their job is not to build careers. So the same thing is true in Hollywood. That all right, I tried knocking on the front door, and I run into problems. Okay, I got further than a lot of people get.
Make our own door.
Yes, make our own door. It's very much. I want their distribution mechanism. I want their money. It's great. I have nothing against Hollywood. I love Hollywood, but I spent 30 years trying a particular way. It's like, all right, let's try something else. So it's like the two vultures, that patience my ass. I'm going to kill something. It's very much a matter of, all right, by any means necessary.
And you know what? Let me just to make it as real as possible. I don't mean that in a cliched way. I have lost too many friends at this point who never got this. Elin Harris, who is a great mentor to me, so supportive to me in my career, literally died in a hotel room in L.A. while he was doing pitch meetings. Octavia did not live to see her work on film. And it was in and out of option probably a lot of her career. People would get close. We did pitch meetings for Pattern Master at MTV Films, of all places, with Andre 3000 and the producer of Shrek at the table. It was a bizarre gathering of people in a bizarre place. It never went anywhere. I mean, there were people trying. She had fans of all colors of power. When you're the producer of Shrek, that is some power, and he couldn't do it. So it's real. I lost my mother last year. So mortality, which has been my lifelong preoccupation as a writer, a lot of my stuff is about life and death, loss, is even more real to me now. I don't have time to have something sitting for 5 or 7 years somewhere when I could do it myself.
Look, I'm working with Reggie Hudlin on some projects. I've got books that people option. We'll be going back to Hollywood later on this year. I'm going to keep doing that. But I realize that I've got skills. Everybody's got a different set of skills, and I'm not using all of my skills in writing books. I have other skills, public speaking and interacting with people. I can sit in a room with Hollywood people, and I can communicate with them, as a lot of writers can't if they're shy and introspective. I'm good at that. And so it's like, all right, why don't I put that to the table? I've got friends. I've got people who have other sets of skills. Let me bring that up there. Don't you want to use everything? You don't want to finish the big game called life feeling like you left some of your game in the locker room. You don't want that. You want to feel like it was all out there on the field. And I realized I've been playing too small, that I had skills I wasn't using, and I was letting fear stop me in some ways that did not serve me and did not allow me to be the kind of role model of possibilities in my family, my friends, and my children that I'm committed to being. It's that question, who are you? What is true? So it is true that there are obstacles. It is also true that if anybody else has ever gotten to the goal that you want, starting where you started, there's no reason for you to think you can't get there too. Are there people who overcame obstacles to get more success than I've gotten in life? Yes. Are they doing different things than I'm doing? Yes. Can I do those things? I can try. That's what's been going on here. And the whole experience here in Atlanta, dealing with a family emergency, in some ways was about waking up. That despite I've published over 3 million words of fiction in 28 now, and that's nice, but it's not all of who I am. Just like nobody listening to this is expressing all of who they are as human beings. We don't get that far. So it doesn't make any sense to wish that you had more opportunity or that you had more talent, because we're not using all the opportunity or talent that we've got. That you use that, and automatically more talent arrives and more opportunities open up. So our guess is if we start making this movie ourselves, that is when Hollywood will start buying our other products, because that's how magic works. You start pulling the universe in a particular direction, and at a certain point the universe says, let's stop trying to break this guy's back. Let's just get out of the way and mess with somebody else, because this guy's too strong.
Well, I mean, to what you said, though, the abiding concern for Hollywood, for anybody right now, is the bottom line. How will this play financially? Where is the advantage in it? I mean, I don't mean to harp on it, but it's the most recent story. I mean, you look at George Lucas had to self-fund Red Tails because no Hollywood studio was going to fund it because there were not enough white faces in it. So I mean, there are certain truisms about the bottom line in Hollywood and about the environment that we're still in. And hopefully you don't have to go the self-funding route. I mean, it's bad that Searchlight fell through, but you would hope and pray that someone sees beyond the mere color of the faces in it and looks at the quality of the writing, the quality of the acting and things like that. But unfortunately, life and industry is not tilted that way. Hang on a second. Let me do this real quick and we'll get right back to it. This is the Genesis Science Fiction Radio Show, a service of the BlackScienceFictionSociety.com website. This is the June 7th, 2013 edition. And we are listening to just a dynamite couple. We have, I'm going to get this right. Tananarive and Stephen Barnes, who apparently one or the other is off to New York soon, and I'm glad you both were able to make the show tonight. But in terms of how you're going to proceed on putting together the full feature, if you have to go the self-funding route or if you can pick up a studio, how is that going to affect your planning other than just strictly the money?
Hey, Tanner, was there something you wanted to say? Then I'll take a turn.
I'm going to back up 1 second and Steve will round back to that. I just wanted to, and this can actually answer your question. We're just learning how to do it. We've been mystified by it. We've watched from the outside. We're opening the door and letting ourselves in. We invested in an independent filmmaking DVD course. It was pricey. I remember we bought it a couple years ago. We never watched the whole thing. Well, we are now, and it's amazing. And it's the demystification of a process. This is how you do it. This is how you do a movie if you have only $5,000. This is how you do. It's just like a 1, 2, 3. This is how you do it. And having seen many people in my circle, knowing that, for instance, Howard has a graduate film program that is producing a lot of great students. There are people who've been working in mainstream media, not necessarily on projects of color, but they have the chops, they have the skill, they're interested. It's hard to build a team, but luckily it's possible to build a team. So I don't know all the answer to your question, except that I know there is a way to do it. I don't know exactly which way we'll choose. It would be an investor model rather than crowdfunding, for example. You're not going to ask people to give you $5 and $10 toward $250,000 or $500,000.
Okay, so here's the way it fits together. Our initial shoot, the pre-production and the production, cost about $15,000, add about 4% for the amount of money that PayPal takes out as they collect the donations. After that, it's going to require about another $10,000 for post-production. Okay, so we've almost got the $15,000 now, and so we've got all the footage, everything is done, which means we're in the post-production. This is going to happen. So as soon as we finish the first 15, then we'll get the next 10, probably using Indiegogo, something of that nature, to raise the rest of the money. But people can still go to dangerword.com if they feel like this is something that they want to be involved in. That means that we have a total cost of about $25,000 for a 15-minute movie. If you then think about a 90-minute movie, you're talking about, say 10 times that, and you're talking about blowing up the same level of production quality to a full film. So you're talking about $250,000 to make a movie, and that has to be fiddled with. And no question. So what you're really saying is somewhere between $250,000 and $1 million, and somewhere between $1 million and, let's say, $8 or $9 million, because the kind of movie I want to do, you wouldn't want it to be any more than that, because you'd want there to be a chance of it making some money back in the market. So anything under about $10 million, and you at least got a chance, right? So if we crowdfund the first part of it, and then we have a 15-minute movie that is a small version of the larger movie we want to do. Now we've got something we can take to investors. Do we need to take it to a studio? We might take it to a studio, but we could also take it to a whole bunch of black dentists, each of whom has $5,000 and would not mind being in the movie business. And we can sell shares. And you get 20 guys who each put in $5,000, and all of a sudden you got $1 million. But you have to be able to show. What kind of show? I can show, 30-something books and all the television, this, that, and the other. And then we've got the 15-minute film, and then we have the script for the whole thing, and then we have a business plan for how we're going to distribute it, and this, and cable, and direct-to-video, and video on demand, and DVD, and film festivals, and all these different possibilities, so we can show these people how they can get their money back.
And
the other thing is that the crowdfunding, the thing that you guys did, will allow us to go to them and say, see, there is an audience. And when you've got that, then you have a chance of building something. Go ahead, Tim.
And I don't think the crowdfunding is just a blip, that we just happen to know the right people who love black horror or black science fiction. I've been hearing for probably about a year now from people in the industry that they're going to meetings and they're wanting horror. That's what, black actors going to meetings at studios. They're saying, do you have any horror? Do you have any horror? Do you have any horror? Why are they saying this? Because the numbers are tracking. When they have horror, what was that one? The feral child. Anyway, Mama.
Right.
Apparently that did very well with blacks and Latinos. Or maybe I'm making that up. But the point is there's a perception out there that black horror is needed. And there is a huge gap between the studio development director who said, "Well, I wish I had some black horror," and the black horror content providers. There's a huge gap. I mean, they're not represented. They've never had any traction. Nobody knows who they are. Nobody bothered to use Google. So by creating our own content, and I say the more the merrier. I mean, so let's have a compilation DVD with 6 short black horror films, by different artists. Great idea. I can't make them all myself.
What was that idea you came up with just yesterday about you wanting to do something that would be like a multinational, multiracial?
Yeah, like an Outer Limits anthology program, but with ethnically diverse stories and culturally diverse stories, And my bet is this. It's not just that black people will go to horror movies. I think it's also that horror fans, while maybe they will still experience the same color shock, maybe it'll be tough to learn how to identify with a black protagonist the way we were trained from birth to identify with white protagonists. Maybe that takes some time. But what the Asian horror phenomenon shows, I think, is that if you can scare people, different can be good. Different can be good. And I think that while black horror and science fiction will be as diverse as all of us are as people, there will be some recurring themes and cultural image systems, not the stereotypical voodoo woman prop that you might see in a mainstream horror film, but a well-thought-out character who happens to be a voodoo practitioner. That's different. Capture it in a different light. Capture the stories in a slightly different light. The fear is coming from a slightly different direction. Because we're independent, we're going to be fresh, different thinkers, So, yeah, it's bound to be a little different. Different is good for horror fans. The last thing a horror fan wants is the same old, same old.
Well, the cool thing, I'm sorry. Hey, this is H. Kane Porter. Hey, the cool thing about being an independent filmmaker is the fact that you don't have the same restrictions or the same limitations or even the same chains on your creativity that you have, when you're dealing with when you're strictly dealing with the studio system. However, that being your strength, you have to really take that. You have to take that to the limit. I mean, you really have to go out of there and really really throw something out there, because all the films that really make it like that, like even though it was a terrible film, with that one, the one with where everybody was crying in the movie, running around with the camera in their face. Blair Witch. Okay, movie was terrible. But the thing was, it was a great idea, and the way they did it was great in the fact that nobody had ever made a flick in that way before. I mean, it was it was a totally new way of filmmaking, for a horror flick. So in that respect, it worked.
Filmmaking, they also had a viral advertising campaign that was off the hook.
Exactly.
They really did a good job with that. So Blair Witch hit a sweet spot. It was a genuine piece of found footage. Found footage was relatively new, and they let people wonder whether or not there was some truth to it. So that part of the loony fringe got to get their pretty bone tickled too.
So as an independent, you have to come up with you got to come out of the bag like that. Not just saying that you have to copy what they or other people have done, but you have to come up with really. You have to really you really have to think. And I hate saying think outside the box, because if you think you're thinking outside of a box, first you realize that you're in one. So what you really have to do, you have to reach in that bag, and you have to really dig down deep, and you have to pull out something that nobody was really expecting to come out with.
Personally,
and one more thing, and the cool thing about horror is that there's so many ways to do that. And just in the one horror film that I made, we started off initially with a kind of a cabin in the woods kind of feel to it, but I knew that had been done. So instead, I turned, I took the meat of the story and a lot of the incidents that went on there, and turned it into into the very thing I hate: reality shows and game shows. So I combined those two things, and then we had a film that really worked, and everybody that saw it really got into it. But yeah, you have to. But that's what you have to do. You have to really, you got to come at it at a different angle. And especially, I hate to say it, especially being, black, you already got a couple of strikes against you. But then again, because you have those strikes, those initial strikes against you, you can be really comfortable in your swing because, it's like, if you all you have to do is connect. And you connect, you're gonna knock it out of the park. The thing is, you just have to, you have to have that mindset about it when you go for it.
What you have to remember is that the arts aren't like sports in the sense that it isn't about how hard you hit the ball. It's about how loud the crowd is in response.
Exactly.
So it's reasonable. If you go to white people and ask for their money, it's perfectly reasonable. They're going to wonder what's in it for white people. It's the same as if somebody white came
exactly.
you have your money, you're going to say what's in it for black people. It's natural stuff. So it's asking how you want to play, who you are, what you believe the world is, and what you want your place in it to be. I know that what I want, being black is part of who I am. Being male is part of it. Being American, being alive, being a human, all those things are levels of who it is that I am. But I'm not limited by any of them. To the degree that I play on the level of race, I'm allowing other people to define me, and I refuse to do that. I especially will not allow people to define me if they do not love me. So I'm going to operate. I'm going to ask myself what is true about human beings. Danger Word isn't about black people, although there is a little Confederate flag tucked away in one scene, which is a little in-joke. It's about people. It's about a grandfather and his granddaughter. And if somebody cannot look at that and understand the emotions that are at play there, then they have a problem. They have a problem. I'm not talking about race. I'm talking about humanity, and the two people at the core of it happen to be black. That we can talk about this because it's such a rare thing to see. But I don't feel that I want to create work that is specifically reacting to the fact that that's a problem in the world. I'm simply trying to express something that feels to me like, this has not been done, and I have a very special thing to offer to this. That this has been part of my experience. I can lend it to this, and I feel good about that. The whole race war thing, it's a real thing. But you can accept life with war as a metaphor. You can accept life with a garden as a metaphor, or a dance, or anything else. And my ancestors got chewed up in the war enough, and I think that part of the reason they did that was so that I could dance. And if I really want to honor them, I have the obligation to celebrate my life.
That's beautiful, sweetie.
Only thing missing from that was it bless your heart?
What he said, basically.
that damn love is just warming the whole place up.
I also want to shout out to another crowdfunding campaign. It's Indiegogo for Rite of Passage. That's Milton Davis and Balagoon Ojatade, who are here in Atlanta. It's a steam funk film they've been trying to put together, and I know they have a campaign. There are a lot of campaigns out there. I try to model them. There are some that are really successful. I started giving to film projects probably about a year ago through Indiegogo Kickstarter. Not a lot, $30 here and there, but it helped me learn how people were raising money, what attracted me as a donor, what turned me off as a donor, and the mentality of why people give to projects, which is the reason I was giving, is I wanted to be a part of it. I don't care if I get my money back if you make your goal or don't make your goal or whatever. There's different sites have different rules. I just want the thing to succeed, and I'd like to see it one day, And I hope people feel that way about Danger Word, that you just want to see it. That's how I feel about the projects I support.
Yes, if I can chime in real quick. This is Trey McGriff. I'm one of the contributors to Danger Word. And I just wanted to thank you guys really for showing courage. I mean, more than anything. I mean, it takes a lot of courage to step outside the lines, really, of what's expected as black filmmakers and create a project of this nature. And what drew me to this project is that it was different. And, as Steve alluded to at the heart of the story, really, it's about a grandfather and his grandchild and their quest to survive, and the horror really was the backdrop. So I just wanted to congratulate you guys on getting the film shot, and I'm definitely going to keep plugging it, on my end, through social media, through friends, through, however I got to do it. But I had a quick question for you guys in regards to going forward as far as distribution. Have you guys considered alternatives to distribution other than theatrical, such as like maybe going direct to video or
15-minute short? Yes, it's going to be DVD, film festival, Amazon streaming download. No, there's no real market, no big, huge market for shorts. We're going to have to do that ourselves. We're not going to make a lot of money off the short. We'll be able to make the money back that we put into it, and we'll be able to make a little bit that will help out while we're trying to position ourselves to the next step. But the real thing with the short is the calling card. Once we've got a full feature, then of course we'd like to have it distributed theatrically, but also, once again, we have all these other platforms, iPhones and iPads, and streaming video and DVD and Riddle and Netflix and on and on and on and on. And we're going to use as many of them as possible. But understand something, that this requires me to learn at Mach speed, because this is more than just what writing is. So the approach I'm going to take is I'm writing a book about a guy who made a couple movies. So it's like, what did that guy have to do it? Because I already know how to write a book.
Right.
If I think that way, that I'm applying skills I've already got, research skills and extrapolation skills, and I know the emotional stuff and the intellectual stuff, and what kind of energy do I need, and so forth and so on. So it's trying to keep the fear at bay, because it really is a matter of stepping outside the comfort zone. This isn't as I defined myself in the past.
And let me tell you something, Trey. We're still floating from the day we checked and saw your donation, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
And the fact that you're part of the Charlotte Film Festival, let's give you a plug.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Definitely looking forward to screening your short, too, next year.
Very, very exciting. But we've had some bad days, in the meantime. We've had people fall through, disappointments, and really had to fight off that feeling. It was like, gosh, we're going to, fall on our face. And in fact, people do. It's not, you don't have to call it falling on your face. But sometimes projects fail. Sometimes there's a missing ingredient that you weren't aware of.
And also, let's be very, very, very real. This is just between, us and just a couple dozen of our closest friends here on the radio. We're artists. We've been successful artists. I've been a successful artist. That means that there are times when we're flush and there are times when we're broke. And we're not going to give any numbers here. But let's just say that by the time we went up to New York to film that thing, we were running on fumes. It was just like that. We know that everything you want in life takes you to the edge of who you are and what you've got. And that's one of the ways that you know that you're about to change. I mean, that I have the best partner imaginable. I am crazy about my wife. She drives me nuts. But the fact is, she's an extraordinary woman, and I am blessed to have her, period. Now, she's my partner. She watches my back. So it's like, all right, if we really put our back against each other, what is the mark we want to make in the world? What is the thing we're willing to die for? And both of us believe in change. She's more political, I'm more philosophical, but both of us see a world in which some of the issues that hurt us and our families are not part of it. I mean, there are other things too, but that's definitely race and culture and American society is definitely a part of that. Where our dreams overlap, then can we both take a stand here and do something that brings both of our dreams to life and make both of our fathers and both of our mothers and all our ancestors also happy? Remember, this generation right now, we are the hope and the dream of the slave. It doesn't get any realer than this. If those people looked at us and we're still complaining, they're going to think we're wimps. And I am not a wimp. I am willing to shoulder my end of the log. So it's like I have an obligation to do something, both for myself and my family, but also to go beyond that. To the degree that people believe that what I'm doing is part of what they want done for their family, that's what every dollar that was sent to this represents. It wasn't about us. It wasn't about a particular movie. It's about, do you or do you not want to create images in the culture that reflect you and show your children the path toward being an adult, path toward there are only two stories. The young man grows up and the old man faces death. Those are the only two stories that there are from that sense, and you need both of them. So we're doing that. Danger Word in 15 minutes covers all that stuff. We put a lot of thought into it, but on the surface, I just can't forget what Jerry Pornell told me was that your stories have to be at least as entertaining as a six-pack of beer, because that's about how much a book costs about the same as a six-pack. So if you aren't given that much pleasure, people are going to go somewhere else. So our first obligation is entertainment. Let me tell you something. This little story is going to knock you guys out. We really brought it. We knew, and our actors brought it. And we're so happy with the way everything came out. And once again, thank every single one of you for being a part of the story. This is your story, not just our story. And we're going to keep letting you know how it's going. Hopefully you'll have us back on. We can tell you about the progress and teach you more about how you guys can do it, how you can be sure that you're preparing yourselves for it. The most important thing, I'd say, make a $500 movie and use that to raise the money for the $5,000 movie. Just write a script about a bunch of guys sitting around the table talking about school or something like that, and make the writing such a center point that people will start ignoring the fact that it's shot on video. And then you use that and what you learn from that to go up to 5,000. You use that to go up to 50,000. You do that, and if you have the talent and the drive to do this, you'll find out.
And also learn how to write screenplays. If you're any of you are writers of prose and you know how to tell a story, don't assume that writing screenplays is easy. It's not. There are some writers who learn how to writing screenplays. There's enough depth to the process that you can learn how to writing screenplays. That means you have to learn story structure. Robert McKee's story is controversial. Some people can't stand it. I think it's amazing. It's the guide.
Brilliant.
It's the guide we use with both the Danger Word script for the most part. Although we rushed
single best writing teacher I've ever heard of.
And the My Soul to Keep script we just finished. We wrote it by that method. It's a very specific method. I learned how to write screenplays because it starts with the story. No project can succeed without the script.
Another thing here, for the last 10 novels, I've written them all as screenplays first, because the screenwriting software is better than Microsoft Word for storytellers, per se, because it allows you can break things down into index cards, and you can create stories that are just plot and dialogue, which allows you to express character. You don't have to go into the description. So you can write, in 2 months, you can write a script that represents a story that would have taken you a year to write as a book, and you can actually test the different elements. Does this work? Then you just flesh it out into a book, and other stuff will happen there too. But one other thing I wanted to say is that there's a piece of software called Scrivener that I've absolutely fallen in love with. I think it's the best writing software I've ever seen. And it does screenwriting as well as other kinds of writing. It allows you to organize all your material. It's fabulous, and it's cheap, and you owe it to yourself. You're right, Scrivener. Just Google it. It's dynamite.
And I'll go out of teacher mode after this, but one thing I will say is don't watch movies to learn how to write scripts. Read scripts to learn how to write scripts. And better yet, read scripts while you watch the movie.
There you go. That's it.
But at the very least, if read the script, because you cannot learn to write a script from watching a movie any more than you can learn how to write a novel by looking at the cover.
Or you can't learn to cook by eating the meal. But what you can do is every week, if you want to write movies, every week watch a movie while you read the script. In 1 year, you'll be ready.
And there are lots of sites. There are a couple sites online where you can find free screenplays. You can also buy them. They can be pricey, but it's better if you can find a shooting script. Don't try to write like a shooting script, but sometimes that's the latest draft. So you'll have to put up with all the technical aspects.
If you read one every week, you'll figure it out.
Yeah.
I mean, you will. There'll be good scripts, bad scripts, good movies, bad movies. What you're trying to do is you're trying to learn how to connect the tunnel between the visual auditory that you see on the screen and the digital that you have in your head when you write something on the page. You have to open up the screen. You have to have a sense of the timing and everything else and see how that relates to what's on the page. And most of this will have to be an unconscious competence. That's why I say do it for a year. By the time you've done this 50 times, you will have it wired in. And it's what I would consider one of the basic steps that you need to make. If you want to find out what it takes to do anything, get the basic pieces of it and do them over and over again until you don't have to think about it anymore. And start with small things like short stories before you try novels, or short film, inexpensive ones before you try more expensive ones. The biggest mistake I see people making is they don't break it down into small enough chunks, and they don't keep going through the initial failures. If you do that, if you keep learning, you keep growing, you keep trying, then eventually life will start giving you the feedback that you need to get what it is that you want. That's how every single person you have ever admired has done it, and that's the path to doing it if that's what you want.
Yeah, but a lot of people don't realize that nurturing a talent like this in themselves always keeps them a work in progress. You know, a lot of people do get discouraged from early failure, but the good people move past that, learn from it, and become better and better and better. So you've got that dichotomy between those who are eventually going to be successful and then those who are just going to fall by the wayside.
Well, that's true, but then you're talking about what is the nature of success. And that goes back to the question, who am I, and what is true. Musashi Miyamoto's Book of Five Rings, one of the core martial arts texts, has a list of basic things that you need to know in order to be a great swordsman. It also happens to be stuff you need just to get through life. And the first principle is do not think dishonestly. And the second principle is the way is in training. Now, do not think dishonestly means that the usefulness of a map is only in knowing where you're going and where you are. And the develop skill at anything is to do it for 10,000 hours. If you want to do something, are you willing to do it for 10,000 hours? If no, get out of the way and let somebody who is willing to do that. If you are, then get on the road and start doing it. But don't tell yourself you couldn't do it because of lack of talent. You're lying to yourself. It's because you didn't care enough. You didn't have enough mastery of your fear. You weren't willing to be honest enough about the fact that you're going to die and you better do something with your life that makes you happy. You know, you weren't honest enough about the dreams you had in childhood. That little kid is still inside you. You know, I guarantee you that little kid is still inside me, and he likes me just fine. I've fallen on my face far more times than I've succeeded, but I keep getting back up. I'm hard to kill, apparently.
Yeah. Yeah, but it does. It takes work. It takes work and it takes focus. It just depends on how much.
True.
And how much you can listen to the criticism and subject yourself to the criticism that will help you grow.
And being black is absolutely part of the equation. Don't make it all of who you are, any more than being male or female or American or anything else is all of who you are. It's part of who you are. And if you want to create rapport with people who have power but have an opposition to you because of race, for instance, then you have to make the connection something that is about something other than race. Because they have their fears and their hopes and dreams, and they're trying to keep the Beamer in their driveway and pay the mortgage and send their kids to private schools too. And if you can convince them that working with you will make them money, they will work with you. So what you have to do is look at the situation as it actually is, not as you wish it was, but as it is, and then ask yourself, what do you really want, and are you willing to let go of your ego to get it?
Well, let go of your ego and put in the time and effort to get to the point where your talent can be appreciated because it is substantial. You know, a lot of people, and I have an analog, you know, I taught tennis, a lot of people would say, well, how do I hit the ball the way you do? You know, what's the shortcut? What's the magic? What's the this? What's the that? And I would pull them all in and be real quiet, and I'd whisper to them, okay, I'll tell you what the magic is, and I'll tell you what the secret is, and I'll tell you the shortcut. And they say, what is that? I said, hit 1,000,000 balls. And it's just that. You have to keep going. You have to persevere. You have to go through failure. You have to apply your learning process. And sometimes people just won't do that. But like I said, the good ones do. Hang on a second here. Oh, go ahead.
No, you're right. The good ones do. The ones who become good do. There are people who are good at being good at stuff. I would suggest that all of you try to look to the people who are good at being good at stuff and do what they do, because there are lessons to be learned there. You know, we're not alone in this. There's not a whole lot of difference between human beings and chimpanzees except for the information that we pass from one person to another. So don't be afraid of learning from other people. Learn from the people who've already done it. And be committed to finding out who you are. Get down below the limitation. The people who see only your limitations or your perceived limitations, that's their problem. Don't make it yours. Don't make it yours. Your job is to live your life, not change their minds.
Exactly.
What were you going to say?
Well, actually, I was going to mention that we have run out of time for this week's show, and I'm hoping we can grab you two again sometime in the future, especially to keep track of the Danger Word project, because, I mean, obviously people are very interested in that. Plus, you both have a lot to offer. You've been listening to the Genesis Science Fiction Radio Show, a service of the BlackScienceFictionSociety.com website, and this has been the June 7th, 2013 edition. And with us tonight are Tananarive Dew and Stephen Barnes, a wonderful couple, which we've found out, and also people who have a lot to offer and great examples for all of us. I want to thank the two of you for making tonight a very easy night, and I realize you had to take off, or one of you is leaving tomorrow, or both of you going?
Tananarive is leaving tomorrow she's going to be on MSNBC on Sunday.
Yeah, and then Melissa
Wow.
Harris show, talking about, of all things, Black science fiction and film, and, I'll believe it when I see it. I'm so excited. I can't believe that Black science fiction is going so mainstream.
Well, I mean, they obviously have an understanding that there is a market for it, and if there's a market for it, somebody's going to cover it, and somebody's going to want to make a little bit of money on it. I'm going to close out the show by asking Jarvis to give us some parting words, and then for those of you who are online, if you two can stay around just for a few more minutes, but once we stop the show, if you can, then people can ask a couple more questions if you have the time. I would appreciate it if you could. If you can't, I certainly understand. So, Mr. Administrator, what you got?
Tonight. This is Jarvis Sheffield, the Administrator of Black Science Fiction Society. I want to thank everyone for participating in the show, and I want to thank our guests, Tananarive and Steve, for coming on with us tonight. I met you guys at Alien Encounters and also at OnyxCon a few years ago, and I was very impressed with both of you. You were very down to earth and informative and encouraging, and I just want to thank you for that. And we're going to continue to support your project, and I want to give a personal invite to Steve to join the site. Tananarive has been on here for a couple of years. I want to see if we can get you on there as well. But once again, thank everybody for participating on the show.
And everybody remember that this show comes on every Friday night at 9 Eastern Time, and then a few days after every show, it's edited and put up for podcasting. Please tell your friends about the show. Please download it. Please listen and get as many people involved as possible, because the more people who know about what BlackScienceFictionSociety.com brings to the table, the better it is for all of us. So on behalf of everybody at BSFS, thank you very much, and have a good rest of your evening or day.
All right. Thanks. Bye-bye. 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 All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.